Hello, I'm John Meier, President of the W.A. Deacon Literary Foundation and guest curator. I would like to welcome everyone to this exhibit. Our partners at the Bruce Peale Special Collections Library at the University of Alberta are very excited about presenting this first exhibit of a complete collection of Governor General's Literary Award for Fiction titles. This is the first exhibit of a national tour. These books represent some of the best literature produced in Canada over the past century. You're going to be seeing some very rare material during your visit that has never been seen in public. Welcome to the exhibit. The significance of this collection is, and the Governor General's Award is very, very important in that it represents the high spots in some of the best writing from the 20th century. Very few people are aware of how far back the awards go. It was begun in 1936. Two titles were given the award in 1937 for two titles that were published in 1936. The award represents some of the best, the cream of the crop, the best writing produced in Canada in that period. The collection itself is every first English language edition. I began this in 1999, so it's been 10 years I've been in the process of compiling this collection. There are many, many rare copies, including author's copies, many advanced states, galleys, proofs, just about every variant you could imagine. Also ephemeral material, letters, correspondence with the authors discussing their award-winning books. And this will be the first time in the history of Canada that a complete collection is going to be exhibited publicly. How I first became interested in collecting these was I had been collecting, literally I've been a book collector since I was in my teens. And everyone was chasing after the same books, the high spots of both American and British literature. And I decided actually to do something different. So I started doing some studies and looked at various Canadian award winners. And at that time, actually, the internet was still just taking off, so I actually wrote to the Canada Council and asked them for a comprehensive list of all of the award winners, and was very surprised when I received the list that I had recognized some of the winners and had read some of the previous winners, and had realized when I got this list on how far back this award went, and the significance of this long history of some of our greatest writers. So really wanted to do something different. That's why I embarked on this endeavor of collecting all of the award-winning titles for fiction and poetry. I began collecting these in late 1999. And it's literally taken me a decade to complete the collection, the fiction collection. I've had many memorable experiences collecting these. I've spent numerous trips road trips in the interior of British Columbia and Alberta. I made some very lengthy trips to Toronto, where I parked myself for several weeks at a time, just hitting every bookstore. I purchased copies literally from all over the planet through the internet. I think the timing on this was interesting in that when I first embarked on this, the internet was just starting to take off. And I believe that there was really quite a few books that came online over at least the first 5 years of the project that were sort of built up over the years in collections. And so I had an opportunity to buy some very nice copies. Also, if I had difficulty actually locating a copy, I would, in some cases, track down the family of the authors to see if I could purchase the family's copies. For instance, just to give you an example, one of the holy grails for the collection was Bertram Brooker's Think of the Earth, which was published in 1936. It was the very first award-winning title for fiction. And Brooker was a very fascinating man. He was very much a Renaissance man, was more known as an abstract artist, and also wrote books even on subliminal advertising. There's some very interesting characters, actually, some of the authors actually in the collection. We've got some fascinating backgrounds. In the case of the Brooker title, I was told by numerous people that I would never locate a copy of that book, that it was very scarce. What I did was I ended up tracking down the family and eventually ended up purchasing the author's copy, which has his notes written in the back end paper, which he was very known for doing actually in many of his books, and had underlined passages. This copy Brooker held in his hands and read from at the first award ceremony in November 1937. At the very first award ceremony. So it's got the significance of some of these titles are very, very important. As of this date, I've read 45 of the titles. And one of the reasons that I've decided to start the Deakin Foundation and tour the collection across Canada is to encourage people to read these. They've literally changed my life by reading them. They've given me a physical connection with Canada that I didn't have before reading them. A good example of these are the historical novels such as George Bowring's Burning Water, which was George Vancouver's exploration of the west coast of British Columbia. Some of the other titles that really meant a lot to me were some of Rudy Weeb's. He won the award twice for The Temptations of Big Bear. Was a brilliant book, and again, like most of Canada, this country is made up of immigrants. And it's a wonderful way of learning Canadian history by reading these novels and reading this literature. It's the best of the best. Quite often I'm asked on what my favorites are in the collection. In the entire list, and I quite often answer that, and it's usually the last book that I read. I mean, one of the last ones I read was actually Margaret Lawrence's The Diviners, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. But there are some other ones that I really do that stand out for me, that were surprises actually for me. One of them was the 1940 edition of Ringay's 30 Acres, which I thought was a wonderful, wonderful title. It ended up, this book was really on, what I got out of it was how French Canadians had lived literally for generations upon generations, lived on these narrow, long 30-acre parcels of land in Quebec. And it's written in a realist style. In fact, this book was very influential on Hugh MacLennan's Two Solitudes. MacLennan actually ended up stating that he couldn't have written Two Solitudes without having experience of reading Ringay's 30 Acres. Wonderful titles. There's so many of them that it's difficult to make a list of every single one, but I have not read really one bad title out of the entire list. And I really encourage people to read some of the earlier titles, many of them which have fallen into obscurity, like Ringay's 30 Acres. There's some really just great literature in here, and it really does represent some of the best writing of the 20th century in Canada. Some of the obstacles encountered actually in doing this, putting this collection together, really has been that many of these early titles really have fallen into major obscurity. No one's really looking for them. So it's been a tremendous challenge, really tracking some of these down. It's basically, for myself personally, I look at it as it's a numbers game. It's just the more titles I look at, the more chance I have of obtaining, really great copies. Also, there has been a tremendous emphasis put on locating the best copies in dust wrappers. So condition was a major issue actually throughout putting the collection together. And trying to find unique copies. That was really a challenge too. And the collection actually has many unique copies, including there's several authors' copies. There's some very rare early states of the books. For instance, The Long Galleys for Robert Croce's Stud Horseman. There would have been only a few copies of that produced. We have some really rare editions in this, and we're very excited about showing these publicly, exhibiting them publicly with our colleagues at the Bruce Peel Special Collections Library. The importance of the collection to scholars and researchers are they're really the only way to be able to study these books, and especially from a bibliography standpoint, or bibliographer standpoint, is really to have multiple copies. By purchasing multiple copies, I've been able to identify many binding variants that were not identified in the past. And it really shows, what it shows is actually a publishing history of these titles over many years. Also, I think the graphic design on many of them too are very interesting, in that some of the dust jacket art is just absolutely wonderful, and it's things that we just don't see anymore. Some of the earlier titles are really quite stunning. It would be very difficult to assemble a collection of this size and magnitude today. The reason being is that many of them are such unique copies that you just can't, I mean, it's very difficult to replace an author's copy. And there's usually only one author's copy. But also the scarcity of some of these earlier titles, especially the even locating any of them in dust wrappers, is very, very difficult. And they, as I mentioned earlier, they've fallen so far into obscurity that no one's really even looking for these, and they've never really been preserved. It's been a tremendous challenge actually locating many of these. And to be quite honest, I think it would, I spent 10 years and a good part of that 10 years, many, many days, including as much up to 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, just looking for these titles. And I think that if you put enough time into something, you're bound to actually have some kind of, you know, you're able to find some of these titles actually by just putting in the long, long hours. It would be very, very difficult to recreate the same collection in the same kind of scope and depth as I have done over the last 10 years. I'm quite often asked about where ebooks are going and whether this spells the death of the book. And it's a very, very interesting question to ask. Is at some point, is the award going to be given to an ebook? I think we're still probably a little bit too early for that to know exactly where this technology is going. My own personal opinion is, I think with ebooks, is that I think it's very effective and helpful for reference material, something that needs to be upgraded on a regular basis. But there's still that tactile aspect of holding a book in your hands. And I just don't think, especially with fiction, I think that books are going to be around for a very, very long time still to come. My most memorable collecting story, I have quite a few of them. I think probably tracking down my Holy Grail, Bertram Brooker's Think of the Earth, I think was a very interesting story, which I'll elaborate a little bit on. What happened was they reissued this book within the last decade. It was almost 10 years ago. And what I did was I tracked down the publisher and found out from the publisher. I said, look, you must have had a first edition of this book because it was never reprinted, to have done your edition from. And the publisher said that yes, they did have a copy, that he would call me back in a couple days if he located the copy, that he would just give it to me. So I patiently waited by the phone for 2 days, heard back from him, and he said that he couldn't locate the copy, that he felt it was probably their editor actually who had a copy, and he gave me her name. Well, that story, it was very interesting. This woman actually had gotten, since she left that publisher, there was a bit of a falling out, I believe, with the publisher and the editor, and she had later gotten divorced, changed her name. It took me literally about 7 months, 6, 7 months to locate her. I found out when I finally got a hold of her, I found out that she had borrowed the copy from the family. And that's how I tracked the family down. I tracked down the grandson, who I spoke to and probably corresponded with and spoke with for almost a 6-month period. And this story goes on, but the end result of it was I ended up purchasing the author's copy. And that was extremely, extremely exciting, because I had never even seen a copy of this book until that time. So that was probably one of the better stories. But there's been some very, very interesting, numerous interesting stories actually of tracking down copies. The most excited I get is when I see something that I've never seen before, and I think that, and obviously the chase for any collector is a big part of collecting. This last, what was it, the end of 2009, while I was visiting the University of Alberta, I had a couple hours off at the end of my 3-day trip, meeting up with my colleagues, and hit some of the local bookstores. And you never know where you're going to find a great title. You just never know. I mean, that's why I think you have to you have to look everywhere. And I popped into, I think it might have been my 6th or 7th bookstore that afternoon, and located a copy of Margaret Atwood's The Circle Game, which was G.G. Winter for poetry for 1966. And Atwood, it's a very, very scarce title, and this book had been literally sitting on the shelf for, I believe I'd asked them, and they said it was 4 or 5 years that it had been sitting there, and just waiting for me to come in and buy it. But you never know where you're going to find a great title, and really you have to look everywhere. If you're a serious book collector, there's no one perfect place to find a book. You have to literally just